what we've seen is, in many ways, the president's platform in 2016 was the perfect platform for right now. He was talking about things like manufacturing. Right now, we're starting to talk about shortages. And why? Because we don't have manufacturing here in the United States. Or the manufacturing that we do have, the supply chain is fragile. And so we've had this catastrophe, and even if you don't think, I hear a lot of people saying that, well, coronavirus is overblown. Okay. What I said today on Twitter was treat this as a fire drill. Let's say you don't think coronavirus is that big a deal. What if in the future, in the near future perhaps, China or another hostile power releases a biological agent on US soil, and you start seeing hundreds of thousands, millions of Americans dying in very short order? We are unprepared. And we've talked about self-driving trucks. And the reason I brought that up was because, well, that's a vector. And this goes to the strong towns thing, that we want to have Main Street. We want to be able to quarantine, but still be self-contained, self-reliant. In the case that a disaster strikes, we're not having to venture out of our city, having to spread the virus all over the country. We if we do need to do trade, if we do need to trade with other cities and states and countries, well, we can do that with a lot fewer touches today than we had to 100 years ago. And so we should be leveraging technology to do more telecommuting, more. If the legislature can convene online, your business can. If you have an office in San Francisco, you don't have to fly out to San Francisco anymore. But and this I think meshes very well with Trump's strengths, but he needs to be more forceful and more articulate in getting that across, because this is, if you want to talk about the suburban moms, which is where he's really having trouble, their big issue is and will be security. They're less worried even about the economy, because if you live in the suburbs, you're more likely to be able to telecommute, but you're still worried about the number of deaths in New York City. You're still worried about the number of deaths nationwide. He should be hitting that so hard right now. But if you look at the latest polls, well, let's look at how he has handled the past couple bounces. After the Mueller investigation collapsed, it was clear there was a witch hunt out, that there were a lot of people out to get him. And okay, he saw a bounce for a few days, and then it immediately evaporated. That's not good. That's not the sign of a good politician. He's not able to lock in gains when he beats his opponents in these political debates. He's not able to lock them in because we're in this spin cycle, news cycle, where everything is moving so fast and it just goes in circles, and there's no memory of what happened. And so he's not been able to establish campaign themes, in my opinion. And I understand that's part of his strategy, that when people sort of throw stuff at the wall to attack him, like Bleachgate and so on, his strategy has been to sort of flood the zone, as Steve Bannon would say, which is distract everybody and move on to the next topic. But that works both ways, because when he really has something important to say, well, we're off to the next topic. And so what he's saying about manufacturing doesn't stick. And I think it's so important. And we can look at he's already wasted the rally around the flag effect, because he hasn't been able to get his message across, and he hasn't been consistent. He hasn't looked like a strong leader, even though he said he was a wartime president on this coronavirus thing. He has looked weak. Uh, Cuomo, Governor Andrew Cuomo in New York, has a 77% approval rating, and Trump is struggling to break 45%.
Let's talk about Cuomo. Let's talk about the this idea, because I know you've tweeted about it quite a bit. A lot of people think that Biden is not going to be the nominee, that everybody wants Cuomo now, and that Cuomo is
Yeah,
going to
it's
be
hard to do,
drafted
though.
somehow.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about it. Let's
Okay.
talk about it, because
Let's talk about it.
that's something people are interested in, I think. I
Well,
am.
at the convention, the dirty little secret about conventions is that there are no rules. It is a no holds barred cage match. And whoever comes out on top at the end of a convention is the winner. Because if you lose a convention and somebody tries to sue you, what the courts will say is, too bad, you're acting like toddlers. You have a clubhouse, you have your rules, and you couldn't even obey your own rules. So I'm not going to clean up this mess for you. And I've seen it happen at convention after convention where people say, "Oh, that's unfair, and I'm going to sue, and there's going to be a lawsuit." And it never comes to anything. And so anything could happen when the Democrats come to their convention. But their constraint is not what you can do at a convention, because they can do anything. The constraint is, will the Democrats, will the independents that they need to bring along with them accept the result? And you're going to have, let's say they throw Biden under the bus. Okay, he's done. What about all of those Bernie supporters?
Maybe he has an unfortunate accident, let's say.
Yeah. And hey, he's not in great health. I think it's entirely possible he could have a heart attack or a stroke or some other medical emergency. Legitimately. I'm not saying that somebody's going to take him out like a mafia hit. I'm saying he is not in good health.
That was what I was implying. That was what I was trying to imply right there. So I want to be clear.
Sure. Yeah, it could happen. But it could also be just he could have a medical emergency between now and then, just the pressure of being in this race that would force him out. Or at the very least, give him the pretext he needs to step aside gracefully for the good of the party. Could happen. But what about all of those Bernie supporters who say, hey, Bernie Sanders came in second. Why doesn't Bernie Sanders get to be the nominee? Shouldn't he be the presumptive nominee? And the answer to that, of course, from a pragmatic point of view, is Bernie Sanders is a communist. He's a radical extremist. He calls himself a social democrat or a democratic socialist, but he's an old-time Marxist. That's what he really is, and I think he's probably too extreme for the country. On the other hand, I think there's a lot of people who are just sort of checked out. It's not impossible that Bernie Sanders could become the president if he won the nomination. But if I'm one of the people in the smoke-filled room, if I'm one of the super delegates on the Democratic side, I'm thinking a couple things. One is Joe Biden and this Tara Reid thing. That could be really toxic in November. If that gets hit really hard, we could see Joe Biden just be embarrassed.
But do you see the media really going with that? I don't see the mainstream media really picking up that story any more than they already have. So
no, the media
I don't think that's going anywhere.
The media won't. So it would be incumbent upon the Trump campaign to really go guerrilla and start hyping the heck out of this through alternative channels. And maybe it's putting out billboards. I mean, they could get creative because the social media companies are going to be against them. The TV stations, radio. Well, you have talk radio, which is going to be supporting him, but talk radio only talks to a very small audience. And so I think a lot of the media companies are just going to be against him, and they're not going to let them get their message out. But
especially now, because people aren't doing their commutes. That's one of the big draws of talk radio is people doing those long commutes you were talking about earlier, those long commutes into work.
So I think it would be very hard. But if you are in the leadership of the Democratic Party, you are worried, well, what if they do figure out a way? What if they do crack the code? That could be a big problem. And so they're going to want someone like Andrew Cuomo there because Andrew Cuomo is popular. Andrew Cuomo is articulate. Biden looked like a punching bag when he was, this whole hang dog, puppy dog look like, well, okay, Mika, continue your point. He doesn't seem like a fighter to me. And I don't think that's going to play well in the debates. But at the same time, he's leading all the polls right now. It's absolutely, it's wild that he's up in Minnesota by 12 points, up in Pennsylvania by 6, in Michigan by about 5 or 6 points, Ohio by 6 points, Wisconsin by 3, Arizona by 4. So you just go down the list. If things don't change, if the Democrats are able to just hold on to the wheel and things kind of go in the direction they're going, Trump is going to lose in a blowout. And I think a lot of Republicans are complacent and they're like, well, he's popular and the polls were wrong. The polls weren't wrong last time. But if there's one other saving grace, there's Tara Reid, but there's also Justin Amash, which you mentioned in the title here, the Amash in the room. Justin Amash, in my opinion, will take more votes away from the Democrat, from Joe Biden or Andrew Cuomo or Bernie Sanders, if we have something crazy happen in the next couple months. He will take more votes away from the anti-Trump candidate than he will from the pro-Trump candidate. And you have Jesse Ventura jumping in, who similarly will divide the anti-Trump vote. So if Trump has
Wait. I didn't even hear about Ventura. When did that happen?
yeah, he's jumping in. He threw his hat in the ring. He wants to run for the Green Party nomination, and he previously was in the Reform Party with Ross Perot and Donald Trump, actually, and so it'd be a really wild race.
We gotta do a show on that. I didn't even know that Ventura was looking to get in the race.
Yeah, and Ventura is not your typical Green Party candidate, but he's also not your typical right winger. He is a
he's not your typical anything, Pete.
So. No, he's not. And so he's a real wild card in this race. But I think he would be more of a Ralph Nader type who would really hurt whoever the Democratic nominee is. But right now, I think there's a lot of voters. So if those third party candidates catch fire,
Pete, let's back up a second. Okay, so you're asserting something that's counterintuitive to most people in established political circles, because in established political circles, the fight is always between the Libertarian Party and the Republican Party. In other words, the Libertarians, traditionally, they're thought to take votes away from Republicans. And as you mentioned, traditionally, the Green Party's thought to take votes away from the Democrats. So I want to back up on this, that you believe that that Congressman Amash might actually hurt the Democrats more than the Republicans. I would like you to elaborate on that, because that is counterintuitive to what most people say.
Okay. That's a really good point. I want to say it was 10 years ago in Arizona, the Republican delegation lost 3 key seats, and we haven't been able to win back our congressional delegation since. And the reason why the Republicans lost in Arizona, because you have 9 districts and you had 3 seats flipped to the Democrats. What happened was you had 3 Libertarian candidates who took votes away from the Republicans in those races. In fact, one in District 9, which is where Kyrsten Sinema got elected, that's how Kyrsten Sinema got elected, was the Libertarian in that race took about 10% of the vote, which kept Vernon Parker out. It allowed Kyrsten Sinema to win. And now Kyrsten Sinema is our senator. And boy, is she gearing up to run for president in the near future. Don't be surprised if our first woman president is Kyrsten Sinema. So traditionally...
Not if I have anything to say about it, Pete. Not if I have anything to say about it.
Well, I think, okay. So, yeah, we have our problems with Sinema, but she is a very savvy politician. But in Virginia, Ken Cuccinelli, you know Ken Cuccinelli, he was the guy who threw his credentials down in 2016, said he wouldn't vote for President Trump no matter what. He was a never Trumper, and now he's a member of the Trump cabinet or the Trump administration. He's a very conservative guy, and he ran against a Democrat and a Libertarian, and the Libertarian was not your doctrinaire Libertarian. And he advocated things like, we're going to have a fuel tax, but because we have electric cars, well, those electric cars don't burn oil. They don't burn gasoline in their tanks, I should say. And so we need to put tracking in every car to see how many miles you drive, to see how much of Virginia roads you're using. That's not very libertarian, but you see a lot of these ideas coming from so-called libertarians.
Yeah, there was an issue. There was an issue that I was quite aware of, where people, and that, by the way, that happens to the Green Party in Arizona as well, because I actually knew a Green Party candidate. In fact, I even brought her to one of our forums. I'm not sure if you met her, but
yes,
and she was not very green, to be honest with you. You know what I mean? So a lot of people use the third parties because they're relatively easy to run, and then you get they might have a spot on the ballot. And that happens. There's no doubt that happens with both the Green Party and the Libertarian Party, that they aren't necessarily very ideologically green, not very ideologically libertarian, but they somehow get on the ticket anyway.
Yeah, my favorite Green Party candidates, some political genius in Arizona, a Republican, went up and down Mill Avenue and recruited all the homeless people to run for office as Green Party candidates in order to split the Democrat vote. I thought that was the most hilarious thing, because in Arizona, you have a voters guide that comes out where everybody who's running for office gets a paragraph, and they say, "This is what I stand for." And it was all these homeless people writing, "Yeah, me and my buddy Scooter rode out here, and we got kicked out of college, and I think that was totally bogus, dude. And I don't think that should be allowed." And it was like, oh my gosh, where did these find these people? But it was very effective. But back to Amash, I think Amash, even though he's Mr. Conservative, he's far right on almost every issue. But you have a lot of people.
Well, I want to say that I don't think I would call him far right. I think because most people, when they hear far right, they think he's a fascist or something. Because most people have we've talked about this before. Most people have that traditional view of politics that I think is completely wrong. I think when it comes to right and left, you're really talking about tyranny versus freedom, and in that case, I think the vast majority of us are actually left. The whole idea that a communist and a fascist are not basically one and the same, I think is just complete garbage. So Amash, I think, represents that extreme, actually extreme left, traditional left, which is that classical liberalism, the idea that you are actually pro freedom, and in that case, he actually would be extreme left. So I just don't follow that entire paradigm. I think it's outdated and it's garbage. And certainly I don't think anybody really regards libertarians as extreme right, at least not in the traditional sense. Nobody thinks a libertarian is a fascist. They're completely opposite of fascist.
Yeah, and now actually there's a lot of people who are viewing people like us, people who are libertarians, as being sort of centrist, because we're not like the populist Trump right, and we're definitely not like the Bernie left. And so where are we? Well, we're just kind of in the sensible middle. And it's kind of a funny place to be. But let's go down his policies. He is 100% pro-life. He is pro-Second Amendment. He is a budget hawk. That used to be the formula for Republicans: pro-life, pro-gun, anti-deficit. And Trump has governed as being pro-life. He's kind of come around on that issue. He has not been great on the Second Amendment, but certainly compared to Joe Biden, he's better on the Second Amendment than Joe Biden is, or at least in rhetoric he will be. And on the budget, everybody's the same. Just blow up the budget. The sky is the limit. Just spend as much as you want. But
Trump has been horrendous on the budget.
Yeah.
Trump has been absolutely horrendous. I don't know if I agree with you. I don't know if I agree with you about the Second Amendment. I think he's been very good for the Second Amendment, my personal opinion. But he's blown the budget up, and there's no doubt about that. And everybody's blown the budget up. Unfortunately, even starting with Ronald Reagan. I think Ronald Reagan had good reasons to blow up the budget because he was trying to destroy communism and defeat the Soviet Union through economic means rather than military means.
And he said that explicitly.
And I've heard many accounts that he considered that his great failure, not being able to decrease the deficit during his time as president. But the fact of the matter is, everybody's been blowing up I should even go farther. We can go all the way back to Franklin Roosevelt. Everybody's been blowing the budget up, Republican or Democrat, for years and years and years. I mean, the last surplus we had was actually under Clinton, right? That was the last time we had a budget surplus. And that was a Republican-controlled Congress with a Democratic president. So they can both take credit for that, I think. But we haven't had that since then. We haven't had any kind of fiscal responsibility since Bill Clinton, quite frankly.
Yeah, and I think, look, right now, the people that Justin Amash appeals to are disaffected Republicans, people who probably weren't going to vote for Trump anyway, and they're going to vote for the Democrat, not because they're left, not because they believe in Joe Biden, but because it's anybody but Trump. And so that's why I think Amash would hurt Trump less than he would hurt Biden. Why, on net, it's going to be a Biden win. Not because...
Well, I'll tell you this, Pete. I reached out to a friend of mine who used to be he used to be the president of a local Young Americans for Liberty. Y'all, I think, is the organization that...
Yeah, that was the Ron Paul organization, wasn't it?
Well, they're all over the place, and they traditionally draw from both libertarians and Republicans. Basically young Republicans, and I don't think there is a young libertarians. They tend to go into that organization. Anyway, my friend was the president of one of the local chapters at one of the junior colleges here. And I've reached out to him numerous times about this issue because he's a Biden supporter. He hates Trump. He's a never Trumper.
Right.
And I was like, well, now that Amash is going to come in, are you going to go with him? Because ideologically, he's much closer to you than Biden is. I mean, Biden doesn't agree with you on anything. You're just a never Trumper. And we do get into it, and it does get a little heated because I think he is just a never Trumper. And the funny thing is he's like, no, I'm not going to support Amash. I'm Biden all the way. Biden, Biden, Biden. And this is someone who, has great credentials as a small L libertarian. As far as he was actually the president of a local chapter when he was going to college. So that's kind of why I've been asking you this question. Is I don't know if I really believe that Amash is going to draw more from Biden or Cuomo, whoever the candidate is, than Trump.
Well, yeah, early polling indicates that is what's happening in Michigan. When they include Amash in the polling, then Biden's lead goes down. And so we don't know for sure that's the trend that's going to continue. But so far, that's what the data suggests.
Well, that's interesting. That is interesting. But then again, that's his home state, correct? I mean, that's
right.
That's where Amash represents, is in Michigan. So
yeah, and he won't probably be a factor in other states. And so it does help. It does help Trump in Michigan. Will it help him in Wisconsin? Yet to be seen. It may be that Amash gets zero traction and he's just a non-factor, that Jesse Ventura is a non-factor. On the other hand, people know who Jesse Ventura is.
No, Jesse Ventura is going to be very. I feel like we have to have a whole show about Jesse Ventura because he is such an oddball. I mean, really. But the fact of the matter is, Jesse Ventura has credentials. Whether you like him or you don't, he was the governor of the state. He has served as an executive before, so he's a real interesting person. You know what I mean? I have my issues with
independent thinker, and in a time when neither party, Trump came in saying, "Hey, I think different. I think outside of the box. I'm going to represent people who haven't been represented," and to a large degree, he has come through on that. But Jesse Ventura has the credentials to do the same thing, which is reach out to people, different people than Trump reaches out to. Obviously, they're very different types of candidates, but to reach out to people who right now are not represented at the national level and say, "Hey, I speak for you." And so he is, as far as I'm concerned, Ventura is a complete wild card. I think as a Green, he would pull from Biden, but as somebody who was formerly a member of the Reform Party, maybe he does have some of those same instincts as Trump does and can reach out to some of those same constituencies and cut into Trump's base. We have no idea because we're just getting started. But right now, I would say things look very bleak for Donald Trump. I think he has missed his window to reach out to independents. And so even though it's early, I think everything favors the Democrats going into November. But there are just a few wild cards out there that have given Trump a path towards victory in the past couple of weeks. Because I've been saying since last August that Trump is going to lose.
Well, let's talk about one more wild card here, okay? Because obviously the Trump is going to lose is a narrative that there's plenty of people that are putting out there. So, but I'm interested in this libertarian race a little bit because Amash resisted this for quite a while, and then it seemed to me like he came out of nowhere. There was some speculation he might run as an independent. That was the last thing I ever saw. Not that he would run as a libertarian. He has not ever declared himself as a libertarian until last week.
Right.
And I've seen a lot of chatter or a lot of big L libertarians, because I should qualify that, the members of the Libertarian Party, which I am not, and I don't claim to be. But I have voted libertarian in numerous elections, and I'm talking big L libertarian. But the thing is with Amash, there was a great deal of speculation that he might run as an independent. He's resisted declaring himself part of the Libertarian Party for quite a while, I think with good reason, because I've had experiences with the Libertarian Party that make me, that's why I'm not a member. And but the funny thing is, coming out of nowhere, there were other candidates that were establishing themselves for the Libertarian Party nomination. And we were talking off the air about Larry Sharp and how he was running actually as for the vice presidential nominee for the Libertarian Party, because they do these combined tickets. And I haven't heard about who Amash wants as his VP. Should he? Well, he says he's going to run, so whoever, I haven't heard who he's going to run with. You were talking earlier off the air about who Larry Sharp is running with, and Larry Sharp is someone that I think is well respected within big L libertarian circles, but I think a lot of the small L libertarians also like Larry Sharp because he tends to be very reasonable and very respectful of people that don't agree with him about everything. And that's my big criticism of most big L libertarians is if you don't agree with every single thing they say, and ironically, these are people who advocate voluntarism, in other words, not using coercion and force. But if you disagree with one single thing with them, they basically call you a statist and throw you out of the room and tell you they don't want to associate with you anymore. That's why I think that's the big failure of the big O Libertarian Party, as far as I'm concerned. But Larry Sharp's not like that. Larry Sharp is not like that. He's very inclusive. He's very articulate. And I even tried to reach out to him on a tweet about, well, what are your plans now that we've got the Amash in the room, as I put here on the graphic, the Amash in the room. You kind of have to acknowledge that because this is a sitting congressman. The National Libertarian Party has embraced him and basically said, we now have a libertarian in Congress, which, they do and they don't because he was not elected as a libertarian, but he has become a libertarian. And therefore, there is now an L next to his name when you do the little rosters of the party affiliations of the different members of Congress. And, some people are very proud of that. And some people are like, well, Amash has kind of come into the party a little bit late here.
Right. And you have some really strong candidates for the Libertarian nomination. I mean, it's a minor party nomination, so it almost feels a little silly to talk about these big candidates. But Jacob Hornberger, who I think doesn't have a great name for politics, but be that as it may, he has said, hey, when push came to shove, when you had this $2 trillion bill in Congress, Justin Amash voted present. That's not very libertarian. And so Justin Amash is not a straight libertarian. He's not a doctrinaire libertarian. He is a true independent thinker, which I think makes him a wild card in this race. Judge Jim Gray is running with Larry Sharp. I think Larry Sharp would be a very good candidate for exactly the reasons that you laid out, which is that he's very articulate. He's very diplomatic. His way of expressing himself, he did very well in New York for a third-party candidate. And I think that really speaks to his character and to his viability as a national candidate. And I think in a race like this, where you have very high negatives for both nominees for the major parties, or I should say presumptive nominees for the major parties, an independent candidate has a real chance to make a dent.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Like I said, I wasn't even aware that Ventura was in the race or potentially. Now, has he formally said, like, does he have an exploratory committee and all that?
I believe so. I'll have to verify that, but I believe so.
Because I know Amash does. I've seen Amash's links and all that he does have.
Right.
He's officially in there. So
Amash won a lot of support from Democrats because he opposed Trump, because he supported the impeachment. And you had the other libertarians in Washington, Rand Paul, Thomas Massey, whom we've spoken about a lot on this show. They were against the impeachment because they said it's a partisan thing. This isn't legitimate. And Amash said, no, look, these are legitimate claims. And I think they're both right from a certain perspective. I think Amash was right on the law that you could impeach Trump, but you could have impeached Obama. Obama did much worse things than what Trump did during his time in office. There were many more reasons to impeach Obama. Obama said, I don't have the authority to unilaterally make border policy. And then he unilaterally made border policy. So by his own standards, by his own admission, he was violating his oath of office. He violated the law. He violated the Constitution. And yet Congress never voted to impeach him. Well, because Nancy Pelosi was the Speaker of the House. But even Republicans weren't really saying we should impeach him. And they should have been.
No, that's another show we could have. Absolutely. I mean, I could go through all sorts of things that Obama did. But I want to make something clear too. Is Amash is a never Trumper. Amash has always been a never Trumper, and he's biased in that regard. And I'm just going to say that. Whether you may not agree with that, but I think he's very biased. He's very much a never Trumper.
Yeah.
I followed him for years and years and years, and he is a never Trumper.
Right. And I've given to his congressional campaigns, and I've been a big supporter in years past. But I think you're right. I think this bid for president doesn't make a lot of sense. I think it is very much a never Trump thing, and I think the practical effect is it's going to boomerang. It's going to accomplish nothing. And let's sort of lay out the possibilities here. The best case scenario, I suppose, would be if he actually won. That's not going to happen.
If who won? If who won?
That Amash won. I mean, I suppose if he won the presidency, that's his best case scenario. But we all know that's not going to happen. So what else could happen? Well, let's say he runs and Trump loses, Joe Biden wins, or whoever the Democratic nominee is. Well, that's not going to get the changes, the reform within the Republican Party that Amash wants. And so I think it's just self-defeating that it would make the Republican Party more populist, more Trump supporting, because they say, we were stabbed in the back by those libertarians. They're not Republicans. They're not part of our coalition. And so we need to kick them out. And so the Republican Party becomes smaller and it becomes less friendly to liberty. So that doesn't move the needle in your direction. And what if Trump wins anyway because he takes votes away from Biden? Well, then what was the point? If you're a never Trumper and you help Trump get elected, how could that possibly be a good outcome for you? So I think this is a lose situation where nothing good can come out of him running for the nomination against Trump, even on his own terms.
I will say this though, Pete. The Libertarian Party is a legitimate party, and they have every right to run their own candidate for the office of president, and somebody has to do it. You know what I mean? Right. I think Amash is in the strongest position to take that nomination, being a sitting congressman. That gives him a great deal of credibility. And talking about the Greens with Ventura is a former governor, and that gives him credibility. They got to run somebody. Sure. I am definitely an advocate of third parties. I don't concede the fact that the two main parties have to win all the time. It's just historically that's what's happened. So that doesn't mean it has to always be like that, though.
Right. But the time to run for the Libertarians, in my opinion, would have been 2016, not 2020, when they ran Gary Johnson. Now, Gary Johnson had previously been a governor of New Mexico, not the biggest state, but it's not like he ran for governor of Wyoming, where you can bake everybody brownies and win the election. Okay, it's a fairly
that's not a nice statement there, Pete. Come on.
My point is there aren't many people who live in Wyoming. You have to run it's a large campaign. It's a large undertaking. Is my point. Nothing against Wyoming. I'm saying not a lot of people live there. And so it gives a little bit of credibility when you've won a race that big with that many voters. But what we saw was, I don't know, maybe Gary Johnson smoked too much pot or something.
That's exactly what I thought. I thought he was high every single time I saw him in an interview. He looked high. I've dealt with people that are high throughout my career. He looked high every single time I saw him speak. And then, of course, he had the Aleppo moment that was just destroyed his campaign. Completely destroyed it. Yeah.
I thought, I could. Yeah, the Aleppo moment in isolation, he could have maybe recovered from. It was sort of a gotcha thing where they changed topics on him and he thought it was an acronym. And okay, everybody has a brain freeze now and then. But the tongue thing where he started talking through his tongue, I'm not going to try to imitate it because it's just too annoying.
This was after his CNN town hall that I tuned into with excitement, where his vice presidential candidate said what a great person Hillary was. And I turned it off. And I said, you just lost every single Republican, you stupid idiot. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
By saying that. You're coming out defending Hillary Clinton when you
Who's a terrible human being.
When you want to take Republican votes. And by the way, I just want to make this clear. I voted for Gary Johnson in the previous election as a protest to Ron Paul being excluded from the from the Republican convention. I did not vote for Mitt Romney. I voted for Gary Johnson. But when it came to 2016, I thought Gary Johnson was a mess, an absolute mess, and I wasn't going to vote for him. There was just no way. But I voted for him
Yeah,
before, but I was not going to vote for him in 2016. And I think he and Weld completely botched that election for the Libertarians because they could have had a real effect with two former Republican governors if they really went after Hillary and showed themselves as the alternative to Trump. They probably could have won some states. They probably could have
right.
actually gotten some electoral votes.
Right. Yes, exactly. If you had run a serious candidate in 2016, somebody who wasn't going to get high, and Gary Johnson has talked about how he smokes pot, and I think you're absolutely dead on. He was high. But if you had run a serious candidate, somebody that the voters could take seriously, then you would have a chance to take some votes from Hillary, take some votes from Trump, and run as a legitimate third party candidate. And once you break that sort of 10%, 20% mark in the polls, then people will realize, oh, this guy has a chance. But if you're going to get high and talk through your tongue and mix up what's going on in Syria, people are not going to take you seriously. And so the libertarians threw away their best chance ever to win electoral votes to make a difference in an election. And this year, I just don't see how the dynamics work in their favor. I think you have Trump's base is scared to death of Biden being elected, or at least they're scared to death of losing. And you have a lot of Biden support are just afraid of Trump winning. And so it's going to be really hard for a third party candidate to break through, even though both the candidates from the major parties have high negatives. We have yet to see them be a big impact nationally. That may change, but right now, my feeling is this either goes nowhere or it's completely counterproductive.
And you could be right. Yeah, definitely could be right.
Well, we've gone way over time, and we could talk about this, I think, for hours because we both feel very emotional about this. The nomination process is broken. There's no reason why Biden should be the nominee for the Democrats. It's an absolute travesty, and the fact that this Tara Reid thing hasn't sunk his campaign, I think, says it tells you everything you need to know about how broken our system is. He should have dropped out last month. This is just an absolute national disgrace that Joe Biden is a nominee for a national party. He is senile. Um, he has no policies. He has no platform that anybody's getting behind. He's just an empty suit. He's a warm body and barely warm body that they're putting in front of the American people. And this isn't how America's supposed to be run. And again, not to I bash the boomers a lot, but all of our nominees, except for Justin Amash, are boomers right now. You know, Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump, all boomers. What is going on? When are the Gen Xers and the millennials going to get some traction here? Because we do need new ideas, and we do need to have somebody who can think further ahead than let's keep blowing up the military budget. Let's keep spending $1 trillion every year on Social Security and Medicare, Medicaid. We need to reform these systems before it gets too late. And you know, we can't wait another 20 years, which is my fear, is that we're going to wait 20 years before there's any political will to fix these problems. And it makes me really worry for the future of the country.
No, I agree with you there. There's some major systemic problems that we're not addressing, and they're not going to get addressed as a result of this election either. So,
Yeah, and Trump came in promising to be different, and in many ways he has been very different. We've seen his style certainly of governing is very different, but he hasn't had the courage to take on these really systemic issues of national security spending, of healthcare. He kind of left it in Paul Ryan's hands, and Paul Ryan couldn't get the job done. Trump was not very effective behind the scenes in pushing through a legislative agenda, and then we lost the House in 2018. It wasn't as bad as it could have been, but it was an omen for 2020 is going to be a real uphill battle for the Republicans. So I think Trump needs to focus on his strengths, which are manufacturing, national security, protecting the homeland. This coronavirus thing sort of encapsulates all of that, and he needs to latch onto that as his campaign theme. I'm the wartime president. I'm about putting America first. And he needs to stop going on Twitter and announcing, like he's Merv Griffin, that he's going to give away ventilators to Ecuador and El Salvador and Honduras. And, enough of that. Just do what you said you were going to do. Be America first, because that's the president that the American people want right now. That's the president that the American people need right now. And the promise is there. The seeds are there for a really great campaign, but he cannot get out of his own way. So, with all that said, we are way over time. This is a record breaking episode. This is our equivalent of Alex Jones going on the Joe Rogan Experience. But thank you for tuning in, everybody who's tuned in. We really appreciate your comments and your viewership, and we want you to be part of the conversation. So please let us know what you think about these issues, what you think about Justin Amash, what you think about Jesse Ventura, Donald Trump, Joe Biden, because this is a really crazy time for our country right now. And for the past hour and 45 minutes, I've been Peter Maines. I'm here with Eric Alexander. You guys out there, you keep flying